Today, let's talk about why turkey hunters rub sticks on rocks. For those of you who don't hunt, this might look a little strange, but it's a slate pot call, in which you rub a striker, or a stick, against a slate surface to create a very terrible noise. These are called slate calls, even though nowadays a lot of them are not made with slate anymore, and they can be made out of glass, aluminum, copper, porcelain, maybe? Those kind of things. Okay, but why slate? Answering that question is actually going to be a lot like running my nails down a chalkboard. And no, I'm serious. The slate call operates on the same mechanic as when you rub your nails down a chalkboard. And to save your ears, a more amenable comparison would be when you run a finger around a wine glass. For the wine glass, which I don't own any, so I use a pint glass, your finger slides along the rim, but not without friction. It moves in what's called a stick slip motion, where it catches just enough, and it creates just enough friction to impart force to the glass, which is then released as your finger slides. And if you do that at the right speed and pressure, the forces build up enough to vibrate the glass. And those vibrations are released into the air, and your ears pick them up as sound. That's why these pot calls can also use glass. You just have to scuff them up a bit first. For the pot call, the stick replaces your finger, the slate is the wine glass, and you just have to get the right pressure and angle to create that stick slip motion. So if you go just vertical, don't get much noise. But if you go at an angle, then you start to get noise. But still, why are these made out of slate? Well, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. For some reason, the answer was not in my lunar source book, so these are just my thoughts. Slate is a metamorphic rock and is thus harder and denser than its sedimentary contemporary shale. This is not shale, but sandstone. It's kind of similar though. In case you aren't familiar, slate is formed by low-grade metamorphism, where low-grade means low temperature and pressure. It's formed from a fine-grained protolith, kind of like sandstone, but in this case, the source rock, or protolith, is usually something more like a mudstone or shale, so a little finer grain. That low-grade metamorphism wasn't sufficient to grow new minerals visible to the naked eye. This is uniform. You can't get minerals in slate, but this is just a generality. Kind of your textbook definition of slate is this plain gray and black rock, uniform in composition and grain size. Okay, but why is denser better than less dense? Because vibrations carry through denser material better. We actually see this on a big scale in earthquakes, where on the East Coast, the underlying material is a relatively stable, old, dense continental craton. And those carry the earthquakes, which are essentially vibrations, much better than on the West Coast, which is a more accreted mishmash of material glommed onto the continental craton over time, and also crisscrossed by a lot of faults. You can kind of think of it like the telephone game, where if you have your string and it's hanging loose between the two cups, you won't be able to hear each other through the wire. But if you hold it taut, then those vibrations will carry through there, because it becomes a lot denser as you stretch it tight. It's also probably important that the slate is foliated, which means that it breaks along planes of weakness. Now, I hate to bring up the nails on the chalkboard again, but that's still a good analogy because slate was used for chalkboards for centuries, dating as far back as 11th century in India. You know, usually they were smaller chalkboards that took the place of paper just for students. The giant classroom chalkboards were the de facto teaching tool between about 1840 and 1930 before they started to get replaced by boards painted with green or black porcelain enamel, although blackboards continued to be in use for a few more decades. I'm talking way too much about chalkboards here, but I bring it up because the big slate production companies were centered in the northeast of the United States, where there's a lot of slate and there's a lot of turkeys. Now, I haven't found a definitive source for who invented the first slate turkey call or turkey pot call, but I found a couple references where one put it in the 1800s roughly, and one specifically said around 1880s. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was in the mid-Atlantic region, somewhere in the Appalachians. Note I'm specifying the slate pot call here, because to say this was invented in the 1880s, I think would be a rock fact. As with most things like this, Native Americans were using this kind of technology long before the colonizers came in and started using it. Now, they didn't use, turkey pot calls specifically, but they used river rocks, which are kind of smoothed out, and sticks to create turkey calls. and I'm sure some of those were slate in the Northeast. I did find, however, that the first striker was patented in 1912 by a guy named W.H. Saunders from Virginia. So, why slate? Well, to recap, it's a dense rock that vibrates at a good frequency to mimic turkey calls, and it naturally breaks along planes so it's easy to make, and has a uniform texture, so one part of a rock would be just as good as another. Uniformity is important in manufacturing these kinds of things. And in the mid-Atlantic, there's enough slate to make tons of huge chalkboards, so just think about how many slate calls you can make from just one of those. But do you need to use slate? No. Like I said, Native Americans were making these turkey calls out of river rocks. As long as it's mostly flat, has some friction, and is small or thin enough to vibrate, you can make noise. So we got our striker here, got a pot call. I don't know what turkey noise to make, but if I take this sandstone, it's kind of smooth. It doesn't take too long to make some sort of turkey-ish noises. I have a semi-polished Richardson's Ranch Thunder Egg here, and if I get it just the right way, how about some moss agate? Even have this huge chunk of labradorite, which is not quite polished on the back. So, there you go. You can make a turkey call out of pretty much anything if you meet those few criteria. So you can experiment with different rocks, different woods. It doesn't have to be a store-bought striker. I'll go back to the turkey call, but I have a piece of pine wood or a shish kebab skewer. So there you have it. This is going to be posted the day before Thanksgiving, so if you don't have a turkey yet, it's a little too late to unthaw one, but you can grab your nearest rock and a stick and go out and find your own. Yeah, or just go back to reading the lunar source book.